You're listening to TechRecruit, a podcast that educates talent acquisition and recruitment professionals on innovation to attract talent across all industries. We're glad you're here.
Welcome to the TechRecruit podcast. My name is Stacey Broadwell. I will be your host. And today we have with us Kelsey Wise. She is the Senior People Data Researcher for Verizon Media. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thanks for having me, Stacey. I'm excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you too, because I've been obsessed with people analytics lately, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show to speak at my conference, to tell me about all these things that you are doing, because you yourself told me that you're also passionate about people analytics. So we're going to jump into that. But first, tell me about Verizon Media. What do they do?
Verizon Media actually is a portion of Verizon that was born out of the acquisitions and merger of Yahoo and AOL. So two kind of old school internet titans reborn as a portion of Verizon and utilizing Verizon's resources to improve media such as HuffPost, TechCrunch, Engadget. We also have the Yahoo brands, obviously Yahoo Mail, Yahoo Sports, Yahoo Finance, and then of course Mail, AOL Mail, Yahoo Mail, and surprisingly we still have a good source of customers using AOL broadband. So it's a lot of different things going on, but it makes my job exciting. I get to work with a lot of different types of employees that do different work.
Yahoo Finance and I go way back. That was like I love that tool. I studied finance in college, and I loved going on to Yahoo Finance and comparing different stocks and looking at like the portfolios. Oh, such good. And now that I'm thinking about it, I still utilized it out of college when I was doing market maps for clients, like, researching the different industries and good stuff there.
We just came out of a big kind of push of new things that are going to be rolling out soon with these brands. So stay tuned. They have some cool new features they're rolling out soon.
Oh, very exciting. So you work up in the Los Angeles headquarters, which is also the Yahoo building.
Yep, we have two offices up there actually. One that was a kind of legacy Verizon office and the legacy Yahoo office. So work between the two of those up in Playa Vista, the Silicon Beach area. But we have two great offices up there.
From the venue for LAX TechRecruit, from the window you can see the Yahoo building, and I'd peer down and I'd be like, wow, I wonder what it's like in there. It looks looks awesome. Like it's just like the architecture is cool. And then I haven't been inside, but I've seen pictures and it just looks very startup-y and like trendy and hip.
I'd be happy to give you a tour if you'd ever like.
I would. I should let you know, I have this thing about taking pictures of reception areas and I post them on my online. And I've been doing it for 10 years. I love it's because it's like that welcome wagon. It's like when you first walk in, it's always like really impressive. So I have always so now I have like this whole database of these reception areas of companies in California. So yes, we will book that.
Sounds good.
So tell me about your current position. And then after that, I would love to talk about your career path getting into that.
Yeah, so my current role is Senior People Data Researcher. I sit on the People Analytics and Insights team, which is under the larger kind of people team or HR umbrella. And our team's tasked with really everything from workforce analytics to survey results and design, as well as just basic reporting to different groups within HR, as well as to the business stakeholders.
So, okay, so it's like workforce analytics, surveys, and reporting. So for me, when I look at this, I see the beginning onset of planning out with the workforce analytics, planning out like the hires and then with the surveys, that real-time data, which I'm really interested. I would like to talk a little bit about that. And then the reporting, I just think of like, the historical data, but also like, taking that data that you have and putting in reports for the executives. And I'd be so interested in how you bring that together and how you develop and produce those visualizations. So is that something that's spread across a team? Tell me about the team that you're on.
So our team is pretty lean and mean. We oversee the whole employee population for Verizon Media, which is nearly 12,000 employees. So we're overseeing the work for a large group of people. My primary function is around internal surveys. So I manage our internal survey program, specifically our engagement survey that we do quarterly, as well as our employee lifecycle surveys. So trying to get a good snapshot of the experience of employees from day one to onboarding to exit.
That's it's really interesting because there's so much data that you can take in, and you can also go down this rabbit hole of analysis paralysis, which happens to everybody. My background is actually my first position out of school. I was working as a financial analyst, and I found a certain sort of excitement and adventure in pulling data into this big heap of who knows what, but trying to get to the bottom of that answer and just flushing through everything and like creating these these rhythms and coming to that number and being like, oh, there it is, there's that 9, and it's just like the crocodile hunter. And as funny as that sounds, I think other analytics people who I've spoken with have that same sort of adventure feel. Would you say that was the draw for you?
Yeah, I actually, if I went way back, never really thought I wasn't a big fan of math. I was not a math person, never thought I could do, research didn't appeal to me. And then I went to undergrad for psychology and was going to be a clinical psychologist. And then I was forced to take my stats class, and my professor will still laugh when she knows my job now because I begged her to not have to take statistics. Ended up loving it and being a TA for the next 2 years for that class. And then also was her research assistant and got into research. And I loved, my family owns businesses. I loved the kind of being in the business side of things. And so industrial organizational psychology for me just kind of really fit well. And so I ended up pursuing my master's of science in industrial organizational psychology at Cal State Long Beach. And so it really was just kind of this, all the pieces fit into the right spot at the right time.
The two things you mentioned, the statistics one, and then the other piece, the psychology. So what I've been reading, like with analytics reports and in regards to the people analytics explosion in HR and HR hiring data scientists and, being able to take advantage and how they're harnessing data. But that trend of that IO psychology and coupled with the statistics and the data science together, and you have those. So it's like, you have that preparation and that opportunity, So
I wish I could give a shout out to the exact person, but I was recently at the industry conference, SIOP, which is the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology. And there was a big talk about kind of data, the new wave of people analytics. And one of the things that stood out to me too, that I've really been trying to kind of focus and remember, and I think is really important to the people analytics field as a whole, she said, we have to remember that we're behavioral scientists first, and data putting the people side of things first, and thinking about human behavior before the data comes into play even.
That's interesting. Do you think that's difficult in practice?
I think it's a skill that, as I kind of look at jobs that open up in people analytics, there does seem to be a big focus on the data and statistics side. And I think we're going to see a trend where, between systems being able to do some of these higher level predictive analytics, we're going to need people that have the skills to really translate that. And also to that point, to your point about analysis paralysis, be able to step back and take a look and say, if I approach this from a research mindset, what's the hypothesis we have? We have all this information, but we need a hypothesis first. We have to come up with the questions we want to ask and the questions that need to be answered. So I think there's a lot to be said about the importance of kind of having that view or the lens of I'm looking at the employee, and also in terms of the outcome I want to provide. Who am I presenting this to? How do they receive it? How can we visualize it based on what they need? So I think those are some big things that are going to become more important as the people analytics field evolves.
Do you feel in your current position, even since you've been there, it has been evolving and you're still trying to figure out what those questions are?
Yeah, our team recently has done something which has been extremely rewarding in my mind. We've started this people data review quarterly with our executive leadership team individually. And so we're taking, getting time on their calendars for about an hour each, which we know is a big ask of a senior executive or executive, but getting that time on their calendars and walking them through alongside the HR business partner, the results of their kind of workforce analytics. We've pulled out some key metrics that we think are really important that they should be continuously up to date on, pulling out kind of a high level overview of those. And then one of my team members walks through Visier. We use Visier as our business insights tool, walks through some of the workforce analytics for their organization, and then working through their engagement results and their onboarding and exit survey results. And so really just sitting down with them and having a good conversation and really pulling out insights about what we're seeing and the trends we're seeing and what we, from our perspective, of kind of being in the data and seeing the company level and seeing other groups, what we can provide in terms of insights. It's been a really, I think, rewarding process that's been well received all around, and also really having the HR business partner there, I think, adds a lot of that color and context that we might not have to the conversation. So it's been a really good partnership all around. And I think it's been a really good kind of exercise in how to present data, extract insights, tell a bigger story.
So for Verizon Media, and maybe in that group, what are some of the important things that they like to look at?
So I obviously been focused a lot on the engagement survey. We just got out of our annual engagement survey that has action planning attached to it. And so in that case, we're really looking at, aggregate numbers in terms of their individual organizations, on the different items, particularly items where they're scoring low, and where do you want to take action on? What kind of actions do you want to take from the data? We're really trying to push the message that even as data-driven as we want to be, data is just step one. There has to be conversations and action taken from it for it to be implemented and be significant and important. So that's been a big kind of focus of some of those conversations. And also the splits that we do in data, I think are really important. So looking at, splits in terms of location, in terms of their direct reports, in terms of some, demographic data and diversity data, to make sure that there's no hotspots where we're seeing lower scores, so that we can really kind of hone in on where we want to make improvements or where we have areas of opportunities.
So that's interesting. Like where you might see those anomalies in your data, and then actually like you said, honing in on that. Has there been some of those? Can you provide some examples of maybe some of those anomalies that you've seen, and whether it was it because of the data input, or was it because actually some action needed to be taken, and maybe what that action was? A success story.
And this is we're just coming off kind of the readouts to the executives. Even just the last week, we were finishing up those, but some of the things we've seen are things where from the executive level to the director level, there's a large drop in information cascade, or understanding of the mission and strategy, which tells us a lot about, okay, it's making its way down, but it hasn't made its way past a certain level. Or on other teams, we'll see a lot of variation in team structure and how people feel about the team structure and the ability to collaborate across different groups, which tells us a lot about, there's differences between these groups. What are the differences? And from there, though, it really does become a matter of how can we use the comments and text analysis to get more information about the differences? And also, what kind of conversations can we have? And what kind of color can be added from important stakeholders and members of the business?
What do you mean by information cascade? Just like the way that from management down to individual contributor?
Just the ability to get information, that you get the information that you need.
Okay, and like just doing your job.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a question on your surveys?
It is. We wanted to make sure that you get the information you need to do your job well. And particularly, we're thinking, when we're designing items, we're thinking ahead in terms of how do we want to analyze this and what could the implications be. So I think, again, that goes back to kind of thinking like a researcher from the beginning and saying, we don't want to ask questions to ask questions. We want to ask questions with the idea in mind of what would be some action is it actionable? If something's wrong, can we do something about it? And how would we want to analyze this data to give us some more information and clarity on the results?
So, and that's just interesting. So have there been like questions that you asked and you got this answer back and you're like, maybe we should ask that question in a different way to kind of shift the paradigm on it or something and kind of restated it?
Yeah, I think it's a bigger than our company. It's the larger question within survey and psychometrics and design there is the importance of trending versus getting the right information. Because to a certain degree, trending is important. It's going to tell you a lot about improvements and changes over time. But we also know that, if we're seeing a ceiling effect on something, that we constantly are getting high scores on it, it might not be something we need to continue asking, even for trending purposes. And ensuring that we're balancing, the right amount of questions so that it's a short and sweet survey, but also making sure that we get the information we need can be a fine kind of balance there. So I think from our end, a lot of it, it's really trying to figure out what are the key areas of the organization that we know anecdotally and from past research and other data sources that are important to our employees. And if we can use trending to continue to measure over time, that's good. But we don't want to stick to hold on to the trending at the risk of losing more valuable information by asking new questions.
Yeah, because then it's important to have that consistency, right? Yeah. And so on these surveys, is the data captured as like a multiple choice, or do you give the option to like add more information if needed, or how do you capture the data?
Actually love about Glint is we use a scaled approach. So we use a Likert scale from 1 to 5 typically.
You use Glint?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, it broke up. And I think I heard the last part.
Yeah, Glint is our survey software. And one of the things I really love is alongside the scale, they'll give you the opportunity right as you click your response to add a comment. And that can be really useful in kind of adding that context and color to the response, because we know a lot in terms of when people want to comment, it's because they have something important to say about it. And so we know that when they're commenting, it's because they want to elaborate on their response. So that I think has been a really beneficial tool in terms of it's hard to design a survey that's not too long and asking granular questions, but when they're broad, they can be interpreted multiple ways sometimes. And this helps us really say it's okay if there's kind of more than one interpretation, because this is not the end all be all, we're going to use comments and other information to kind of create a larger picture here.
So it's interesting. I had this conversation, I think it was this morning actually. And in regards to putting these surveys, or even in doing doing the performance reviews, that you can almost tie these surveys and questions back to the job profile or the job description when you write it. And that it almost starts there, that you can tailor those job descriptions and profiles so that later 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, that you have these surveys that come out that, are you hitting these expectations, and how do you feel? Do you feel like it ties back to that? Is it that streamlined?
The current kind of organizational setup has been multiple integrations over the last few years, and even now we're aligning more closely with Verizon systems and kind of processes. So unfortunately, we don't have the kind of longitudinal data in terms of performance and things like that to really get into that, but it's something we have in our pocket to definitely look into more, and I know that our team is pretty keen on it.
So for your role, I mean, as you said, it's engagement, right? It's, how, ultimately what you're looking for is, do they like their job? Would that be kind of like what you're trying to, are you happy? Do you like your job? Do you feel like you're being challenged? Are you engaged? Is that kind of the thing?
Yeah, we take a multifaceted approach to measuring kind of engagement as a construct. So in terms of, do you like your job? Would you recommend working here? And kind of, do you want to stay here? We see those as kind of the key areas that we want to measure in terms of, are you engaged? And that also helps us, when you break it out, determine kind of the bigger experience. If one score is dropping lower than another one, kind of how do we remedy that? And then from there, the other items, we refer to them as drivers, which is also what Glint refers to them as, drivers of engagement. So for a more kind of technical speak, the predictors versus the engagement being the outcome variable.
Yeah,
that's also in terms of action planning. We do, action planning with our managers, and the focus is always on not the engagement items themselves, because we say those are the outcomes. Our goal is to take action around the drivers. We want to take action around the areas of opportunity and those drivers of engagement that will then indirectly improve engagement overall.
What are some examples of actions that you've taken around drivers?
So right now we're in our action planning phase, and we're really taking the approach of, it needs to be cumulative and individual. So working with your team on an action plan around your team level results, but then they should also be doing that with the team below them and below them, so that it's not necessarily all fed up into one single goal, but it's cumulative to a certain degree and individual, because each team's going to have some nuances that are accounted for in the survey and in the results.
So you're using Glint. You're using, what was it that you said earlier? What was that?
Visier.
You're using Visier, you're using Glint. What other technologies do you guys use?
Those are our two major kind of technologies. In terms of actual data analytics and statistics, a good chunk of our team uses R. My background is SPSS, and I'm trying to get my feet wet within R a bit more. So those are used a lot on the back end for the more analytics outside of tools. We try to have a healthy balance of utilizing the dashboard capabilities of the tools we have as much as possible, and then also pulling that raw data out and merging it with other data sources to do more predictive analytics and more kind of high level analytics with those.
Okay, so you have with Glint and Visier, and it ties in with your other systems, so you can easily, through those APIs or plugins, pull the information in there and see them within the dashboards which is way easier than like 10 years ago when I was pulling from 5 different sets into crystal reports off of a SQL database and then into Excel and trying to create a visualization model. And right. But do you use Excel or do you?
Yes.
Right?
Yes, every day. We still use, I mean, Excel is the one thing that's never going to go away. I think Google Sheets are fine, but Excel still reigns as the king.
Right. Okay. So I did this leaders in data event for CTO Roundtable. I don't know, a couple weeks back, and the one of the CTOs, she stated that she's trying to get all of her team off of Excel. Not that I think she was saying that they don't use Excel, but when someone does, she tries not to snicker about it or tease them. And to which I was like, everybody's using Excel, but she's very much R and on the predictive side. But it's glad to hear, like, here, fist bump on the Excel, right?
Well, and I also think to that point, similar with dashboards, is that they're very useful in kind of giving us those high level results. So Excel does, some very good functionality in terms of giving us some baselines, because if you don't know where you need to dig deeper, you don't have anywhere to start. So it's a good baseline, I think, to figure out where are the hot spots, where are the differences, and is it worth exploring further? So I think, we always have to keep in mind that complex is not always best, that sometimes starting from simple and then going from there and kind of going on a hunch and a hypothesis and testing that out can be, really game changing.
Do you use Tableau at all?
We don't in our organization currently.
You don't need to, because you have the dashboards within your systems, right?
Yeah, and we've actually tried to utilize those from just a scalability perspective too. Being able to create and save reports and then duplicate those allows us to do presentations to multiple leaders and have kind of a cultural language and understanding of results presentation. Obviously, I love data visualization and PowerPoints and creating good kind of bigger decks. And I think those apply a lot more in terms of when we're doing those more applied research projects. But in terms of presenting high level results, utilizing the tools has been just great in terms of scalability and quick time turnarounds.
It keeps it consistent, and it keeps it simple.
Exactly.
And I, it's funny because I hear what you're saying, like, you like to create the visualizations and do the PowerPoints and present the story. And I think one of my first boss said to me, I created all these visualizations and they're in Excel, and she's like, what is this? And I said, well, this is them. And she goes, no. She's like, you're going to go in the executive board and they're going to ask way too many questions. You got to keep it simple. Get rid of all that. And I was like, oh, that was my beautiful work. Right? Have you encountered that?
I think it's definitely a balance. And it's also, and this is why, working closely with our HR business partners has been great, because you need to know the audience, and especially in an organization like ours where there's a lot of different things going on. So depending on the group you're presenting to, you need some kind of background and base level understanding of what their presentation and intake style is. Mm-hmm. And so I think for us, that's been just a key partnership, is working closely with the people that know that business unit well and can tell us a bit more about how they like to take things in. And then we do our best to, as much as possible, adjust that to fit the group we're working with.
So it's an interesting segue, I think. I am so curious how you got into people analytics, kind of like your career path. So tell me, like, how did it start for you? I mean, was it like you wanted to do this or and like how you went through college? How did you get to where you're at?
I guess once I got into grad school for IO psychology, or industrial organizational psychology, I there was so much I wanted to do. And even as we went through the program, you keep thinking it's going to get narrowed down by the next class, and the next class opens your eyes to a whole new area that you want to dive into more. There did come a point, I think, where, at least in our program, there's kind of a decision you need to make between if you're going to go more government sector or private sector. And majority of my cohort actually did go government side. I knew that was probably not for me. I kind of enjoy the chaos of the work environment and other things that are involved in the private sector. So I was the last one to get an internship because I was kind of just looking around at different things, and I finally ended up doing just a HR generalist internship with Verizon Digital Media Services, which was a tiny subsection of Verizon that was comprised of 2 startups they had recently bought. And they were largely hands-off, which was a really cool opportunity early on in my career because we got a lot of freedom to kind of do things our own way and kind of innovate and run our show the way we wanted to. So I got a lot of background in just the general HR area and different aspects of that, which I think was, ended up being invaluable. And then from there was also able to kind of ask if I could do certain projects. I'd come up with an idea and be like, I want to do this. And they'd be like, yeah, sure, go for it. Or I want to do, and so I ended up doing, revamping our onboarding. I liked training design, so revamped the onboarding process, did some manager surveys and analysis on manager effectiveness and things like that. So it was a really great internship, and I ended up getting hired on about 3 months in to work part-time until I finished grad school. And then we had the AOL acquisition and moved our little branch of the company under AOL. So got pulled into a lot of the integration work, which was a roller coaster and a lot of fun and baptism by fire, if you will, in terms of a lot of things. But it was a great experience. And as soon as that was over and we all were like, oh, wow, that was wild, we announced that we were also acquiring Yahoo, and we were merging Yahoo and AOL together. And then back into the fire in terms of just getting to do all sorts of different HR and org development, specifically surveys, was working across the 2 companies before the integration was complete on some combined surveys that we couldn't do legally as one, but we wanted to be able to merge them together and be able to see kind of a holistic picture. So I was working closely with their people analytics team, which is where I eventually ended up after the integration closed. So it was a wild few years, but it was a really fun and it was a really good experience.
When you were in grad school or even before, did you ever have an idea like, oh, it might be interesting to work in HR? Or was that just how you got an internship came up?
I honestly, I think I liked the idea of IO psychology so much just off the bat. I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. So I kind of just went into it blind, thinking, maybe I'll go get my PhD afterwards. I liked the academic side to a certain degree. I liked doing research. And then kind of seeing, based on the program, what different opportunities were out there. Again, people analytics was not something I was super familiar with. And it kind of just, at least in our program, was embedded into everything else. Mm-hmm. And it happened to just be one of my favorite parts of everything we did, was kind of the data side of things. So once that opportunity kind of arose to step up and do different analytics projects throughout the various integrations and roles I had during that time period, I was always happy to step in and do those because it fascinated me. And it also, I think for me, allowed me to kind of touch a lot of different areas within HR that I loved. So I didn't have to choose just one and be there. I could help them from a data perspective and also use kind of my background and understanding of that area to drive the data side.
So if you could you give maybe an overview of just what IO psychology is?
Essentially, it's the study of organizations and the people in them and the psychology of kind of how that all works together. So, it's one of those things where my mom, would be like, it's so specific, like, what do you do? And it's like, it's actually really broad, even being, a very small subset, it's super broad still. So it's everything from personnel selection. So that's a lot of the government work, especially, is designing statistically sound, legally sound methods and assessments for hiring people, and doing job analysis. So going around and making sure that the job qualifications that you read are designed in a way that's fair and, again, legally defensible and sound. And then there's the kind of more, we call that more the I side, the industrial side of it. The organizational side would be more organizational behavior. So, how do you effectively train teams, and how do you group dynamics, how do those fit into the mix, and training and learning behaviors. I could probably go on forever about all the different things. It really is essentially anything at work that human behavior would drive, or that research would drive, can be found in IO psychology.
It is, yeah, I can see what you say, because it is broad, like it's this overall umbrella of elements on the industrial and the organizational side, like you're saying, like the job descriptions and the personnel, and then the training and the learning side of it, and then just bringing that all together on how it interacts with the company, but then pulling that data out within it. Oh, it's so rich. So so I'm interested if what advice might you give somebody who wants to work within this field? And I've seen it kind of come from both sides, like a recruiter who's, they definitely have the business side, right? But maybe they don't really have the analytics side, and they want to move into that. Or, they're on the data side and they want to move into understanding more of the business. But if somebody was green, or they're just out of college, would you have advice for somebody who maybe wanted to get into this field?
I think, people analytics is one that having a bit of that background in the data is going to be useful. I think there's some things that you just can't get around. You have to, get your feet wet and understand at least the basics of statistics and of research methodology and things like that. So whether that be doing some sort of, course in that, or going to school for something like industrial organizational psychology, or organizational behavior, you can kind of get that background. And again, I advocate highly for that psychology side being brought into it. I think the kind of marriage between psychology and human behavior with data is invaluable. So I think, I'm probably biased in that sense, where I think that's a really important kind of addition to the field, is having the ability to really add that layer on. But, there's various programs that have different focuses within each program. So I know, like I said, at my graduate university, it was a big focus on going into the government sector. But I also would encourage people to not let that stop you, because for me, it was, that I had to see it to know I didn't want to do that necessarily. And it's perfect for some people, and it just wasn't right for me, but I wouldn't have known that I didn't want to do that had I not had the experience of doing it. So I think, if anything, the big message for me would just be, go out and try different things. You're not going to know what you want or don't want until you try them. All the way back to undergrad, when I was going to be a clinical psychologist and begged to get out of my stats class. Like I said, my professor, I went and sat with her last year and told her about my job, and she was just like, I could go back and shake you, because that's so ironic and funny. You were not about that back then, and you just have to try it.
No.
You just have to try it. You have to try things out and be able to kind of pivot when you need to. But if you do that, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities out there.
Well, it sounds like you have been very successful in your current role, and you've just moved into different roles and grown and flourished, it sounds like, within Verizon. And, and I agree with you with what you said earlier, that organizational behavior being a key component. And so would a lot of research studies. I read one recently by Josh Bersin at Deloitte, and he had, I believe it was that he had said that there was going to be this, don't be surprised if you see a huge influx of consulting companies that are industrial organizational behavior consulting firms that, are helping companies deal with just this. So, so that's fantastic that you have both of those. Are there certain technologies that maybe you want to try yourself?
Again, like in terms of the coding and stat side, want to get more into R. I know that, Python is becoming more and more popular again, even in the behavioral science realm, which is something I don't think we've seen in the past. So I would love to get my feet wet again and get back into the stat side. I think sometimes in the midst of everything else, you sacrifice one area of practice for the others. So I know that that's one area I want to get myself back into. I loved the different, working with the different kinds of technologies and learning how to utilize them. Visier, my teammate runs that and manages that kind of platform while I manage Glint. And I know I want to kind of like swap with her and do some one-on-ones and cross training and learn more about that too. Because I think, the more skills you have and kind of the depth and breadth of those is important.
I think last time we spoke, you were talking about Glint, and I had they're based up in San Francisco.
They just got acquired last year by LinkedIn.
Oh, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah.
And I had reached out to them to try to see if we can get a speaker down here to kind of talk a little bit more about, or even like add to your guys' panel. So you're going to be speaking at LAX TechRecruit in July.
Yes.
in Playa Vista, Silicon Beach. You want to tell us what you're going to be speaking about?
I don't have a clever title yet. I've been playing around with it, so you'll have to excuse my lack of a formal title, but essentially around the idea of telling a story with data. I know it's a hot topic right now, the whole idea of storytelling through data, but I think it's important and really kind of honing in on the idea that pulling out those insights from data and the ability to translate those to various audiences is going to be one of the fundamental skills of people analytics moving forward. So a lot of it, I think, is going to focus mostly on, how do you extract insights from data and tell a whole story and create a bigger picture for your stakeholders using data.
If you were to give a company, because not every company uses surveys, and I've spoken to a lot of companies who are just trying to harness data and get a baseline, but then what do we go from here? Now we got a baseline, and you've got to like accumulate that data over maybe a 6-month period, like minimal, to be able to even tell any sort of story. But then to go beyond that and then start to implement surveys and capture real-time data. What might you or what advice might you give a company who wanted to get started?
There's a lot of, I think a lot of it depends on, for us, there's security considerations and things like that, but there are a lot of softwares out there that are free, or at least have kind of a certain amount of, or levels that are free. SurveyMonkey, I think, is one of those.
I use that one I use that for the conference.
Yes. And they're great. And I know they have different kind of levels and packages, but they do have a free version. I think Qualtrics even still has a free version up to a certain amount of responses. Make sure you're asking the right questions and have someone there that can help you write those questions. I think it's really easy to just write a question or an item on a survey without thinking through really what is the outcome you want to get from this and what are you going to do about it, because that's a big kind of thing for our team that we focus on is if we don't plan on doing something with this, there's no reason to ask it. So making sure that if you're going to ask questions, are you prepared to take action when you get the response? Mm-hmm. And also ask the questions you're scared to get a bad score on or score poorly on, because those are the things that are going to give you the most actionable kind of insights. if you have all high scores on a survey, you're not going to, be able to, you can present some great numbers, but it's not going to create any meaningful change.
Yeah. Maybe it's the employee who gives you high scores on everything that's the real risk. He's not being truthful. He gave us 10s across the board. I would say like the goal seems like it's retention, right? It's mitigating against the risk of attrition, of losing employees, and being able to somehow shield against that. So
I think there's a balance. I think that's something that we know is inevitable in this job market too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something to be said about, making sure that the employee experience while they're there is great. There's the old quote or kind of famous quote around the risk of training someone and having them leave. But on the other side, but what if you don't, they stay. So you also need to balance, productivity, engagement and productivity are very closely tied together. So even if your goal isn't only retention, it should be productivity of your employees. And from a human level, just engagement is making a good workplace is a good thing to do as a company. We should all strive for that.
I love that you said that. I love that so much because like ultimately you're going to lose your employees. Like that happens. I mean, can you mitigate against it? And can you try to maybe, yeah. I mean, but like that employee satisfaction, and that being a key driver for these sort of surveys. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool.
And I think, the downstream effect of that, will be a less attrition too. But I think if we move the focus away from leaving and just trying to make the experience great while you have them, you're going to get a lot more out of that.
Okay. So in that vein, or on that topic, so I'm a startup or I'm a small company and I'm trying to initiate these so I have that good quality experience for my employees, and maybe I mitigate against attrition in the long term. But what would you recommend? Maybe like top 5 questions a company can start with on their surveys.
I think, checking in on making sure some of the basics that they like the work they're doing is
so
important.
Say, do you like what you're doing?
We always kind of go on the higher side. So saying, do you love the work you do? And some would say, is that too strong of a word? But we want to know if that's where we want to be, then that's what we want to ask.
Oh, so you start at the 10 almost. Love.
Yeah, we if you're not trying to just go for the high numbers, you're trying to actually set the bar, then you're asking what you want the outcome to be. If we want them to love the work they do, we want to ask them if they love the work they do. And if they don't, then we want to figure out why they don't and what we can do to change that. So I think having a base level of understanding the work they do, questions around, team and collaboration, I think are important. Just understanding how the teams work together.
What might an example of that be? Like, do you like your peer? Do you like the person who sits next to you? Do you like your boss? Is that like what the question might say? Or do you love your boss?
The whole other section would be on the manager side, do you feel supported, by your manager to some degree? In terms of team, I think, it's probably highly dependent upon your organization. If it's a newly forming team, is it something more around my team works well to achieve our goals or works together to achieve our goals? Mm-hmm. If it's something where, you've been around a while, it could potentially push the bar a little bit higher and say, our business unit works collaboratively across other business units. So I think it has to be dependent upon where you're at as a company as well, and kind of having a bit of background and understanding of the state of the organization. But to some degree, I think measuring, team collaboration and how the teams are working together is important. an important baseline as well. We always like to have some questions that get at diversity and inclusion, whether that just be psychological safety, that you can, you feel comfortable being yourself at work, or
interesting.
We also have done things where we want to, the question may not get directly at it, but we're curious at looking on the back end at the splits between different groups and ensuring that there isn't differences in sentiment between different, especially diversity groups.
What does that mean? Differences in sentiment, like where they feel like they're not included in a certain group?
We've done things around, feeling valued and feeling like your voice is heard and that you're able to kind of give input when when it's needed and things like that, and making sure that there aren't pockets that feel like they're being silenced, essentially, or that they're not having the same opportunity to have their voice heard.
Do you feel that employees would be honest in that regard? Do you think that sometimes if they feel like they're not, and then they're fearful of maybe even coming out and saying that they're not because they might lose their job, or maybe then that will constitute that they would have like their manager come talk to them, or it would shine a spotlight on them?
I think that would be probably a whole other discussion on confidentiality and kind of the impact of GDPR, especially if you're a global company, on privacy and laws around that. I think at the base level, it's really, from a psychology background, the Belmont report talks about human data subjects and research subjects, and the Belmont report is essentially kind of the baseline I've worked by, which is benevolence. Make sure you're always doing more good and mitigating any harm that would be done, and make sure people are informed that you have informed consent from them, and that you're telling them how their data is going to be used and shared and things like that. I think it's a good baseline principle. Again, there's some legal considerations, especially in the EU, around different guidelines in that, but we take the approach of we want to be completely transparent about the level of confidentiality our data has. To do predictive analytics to a certain degree, we can't have anonymous survey.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was, it's not anonymous. Each person has their name attached to it.
But we have a whole kind of set of guidelines around how we protect individuals' data, and just like we would with any other kind of sensitive data. And Glint on the back end, has confidentiality thresholds and things built into the system to protect people as well. So I think, again, I could go on a whole other hour-long talk about confidentiality, but if you make it clear to your employees it's important to you, and you give them the information they need to understand, it should be a baseline. People deserve to know what their data is going to be used for and how it's going to be used, and that you're going to keep it safe if they agree to share their feelings with you.
It's interesting because you hear, I've read in the news different companies, like I think Activision was doing this thing where they would try to incentivize their employees, and I don't recall if it was like they paid them something to fill out forms, or I don't know if it was wear trackers or something like of that regard, but it was just something that was almost like creepy, like looking at their information. And I also hear like a lot of technologies now that will, like the network organizational technologies that will look inside your emails for productivity. Do you guys do anything like that?
No, we don't. I mean, I think organizational network analyses are great. They're an awesome tool, and they have to be done in the right way. I think, the data privacy question is going to become one of the hotter topics in the field as well. So I think it's important to be read up on that in this arena, especially with California stepping into the game next year as well, with a lot of new data privacy regulations. So I think it's a fine line between wanting to get the information and use it and knowing you want to use it in a good way, but understanding that that's not necessarily how it could be interpreted or be used in the future. So, I mean, for us, it's a close partnership we have with our privacy and legal teams to make sure we're always making sure that we're connected with them. And again, comes down to just the human level of like the golden rule, like what would I want, how would I want my own data to be protected, and who would, how would I want it to be handled? So I think there just has to be a level of course, that responsibility you have to protect the company from the legal side, but balancing that at the same level, you want to give that kind of benefit and comfort to the employees as well.
Have you ever heard of, on that, have you ever heard of any sort of lawsuits that have manifested because of that sort of data hurting an employee? I feel like there must be something, right?
I don't know anything off the top of my head. I know, GDPR right now, it's much more, I think, focused on the consumer side of things. So a lot of things with the bigger companies and how they're using consumer data and things like that versus the internal side of the coin, if you will. But I think there's always you always have to kind of mitigate the risks of ensuring that you're not asking something that could even be potentially damaging. And I think it's also in how things are used and shared as well. So we have pretty good stances around, our beliefs and kind of group and team standards in terms of how we share data, who has access to what, and we always err on the side of protecting the employee's confidentiality over everything else.
Well, I just love the work that you're doing. I love the stance that you're taking in regards to like it being like this healthy and helpful way of doing the surveys and the employee engagement. I like, especially like there was two things that I really liked. You said that it's the data and the surveys are for employee satisfaction, but also setting the bar high, for achieving that employee satisfaction. Those are like those two things that I thought were like really cool stances that you take in like achieving these goals. So I'm excited to see where the industry goes and just kind of how it blossoms as it is. And it's like a big reason why we're giving this a stage at LAX TechRecruit. And I think there's so many courses out there and classes that you can take that are almost free, that you can learn R or you can learn Python. I took a Python 101 class that was free, and we're actually offering one at the conference in one of the workshop rooms. And we pulled a data set, we put it in Python, and we created a statistical model with a bell curve, looked for anomalies, pulled out those anomalies, fixed the data, put it back in, and then created a predictive model for prices, I think on houses or something. It was so cool. And I revisited developing a linear equation that I haven't touched in like 10 years. It's like, I remember calculus, and I was really good. I was really good in math, but it was a long time ago.
Yes, it's definitely one of those skills that it's not necessarily like riding a bike. You definitely have to keep practicing, or it wears away a little. That's why I'm on the same boat. I'm like, I need to get myself back into some of the deeper analytical things, because I'm a nerd at heart in terms of that stuff. I love data sets and playing with them and seeing what you can find and testing your ideas and hypotheses.
See, Kelsey, I in my mind think that I want to be a data scientist, and I sometimes mourn that I stopped doing financial analysis and moved into more of a talent acquisition role. But then I realized I'm way more social. As much as I want to be a data scientist, I'm much better developing conferences, of which we're looking forward to seeing you in July. If people want to get hold of you, obviously they can meet you in July at the conference, but how can they get hold of you in the meantime?
You can look me up on LinkedIn, obviously, Kelsey Wise, or my email is Kelsey Wise, so KELSEYWISE @ymail.com.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for being part of the TechRecruit podcast. We'll look forward to seeing you again, and you have yourself a good day.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to present. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, Kelsey.
Bye.